I'm Ben Smith, and this is our video for our Science 2.0 article on drones for the science classroom. This month, we're going to take a look at how we can safely use drones and some ideas for how you might integrate them into the classroom. Now, the first thing that we want to remind you about is that you have to pay particular attention to the law and to safety as you use drones in your classroom. So, some of the highlights that we have in the article will take you to places where you can um, take a look and read through the FAA policy and make sure that you're following those guidelines. There are websites like Know Before You Fly that will allow you to go through and take a look at not only what are the new rules for drones, but also ways that you can start to use them, and just making sure that you're practicing, safety in the use of drones. And of course, uh, as we alluded to in the article, you'll see that we can actually fly drones inside or we can fly them outside, and those will make a difference. Now, if you're starting to look and say, well, where can I even see some drone footage, or maybe even be able to start bringing in the drone footage before you take your students outside, there are a couple sites that you can look for where you can find all kinds of drone footage, and you might be able to apply this to lessons in looking at ecology or travel in different areas of the region of the world. So Drone Trotter is one where you can put in your site and you can share and you can start to see where the drone footage is. And Travel by Drone is another one that will allow you to take a look, and you can see how many videos there are available as you go through. Now, we also suggest that you might want to start thinking about um, how can I get started? And if you really want to go in an economic route, you can start to build your own. There are a lot of places. So GradCab is one of those that has lots of different specific parts, and Thingiverse is another one that you can go to. Like, you just go in and type in drone, and you'll see that there are lots of different opportunities for you to take a look at a drone and maybe even print one. So I just did a quick search, and you can see here's one called 3D Fly. All the plastic parts can be 3D printed, and if you think about it from a science classroom perspective, we could actually perhaps even do some experimentation, like what happens if we make the tips here longer, or we change the weight. All types of things that could be done into a science fair experiment, for example. And when you go to Thingiverse and you look around, what you'll see is that, especially for projects like this, they'll have a summary. They probably have places that you can go and get different information, including an assembly guide. That part of information is nice to know, and then how you may want to set your printer settings. So, can you use ABS or PLA for filament? Those types of things are important to know. And if you click on Thing Files, you'll see, like in this case, you can actually download one file. This one is actually small enough that it'll print on most print beds, and you can download it. But I also want to make sure that you pay attention to the information that is over here. These are the copyright rules, and so in this case, for example, it's non-commercial, so you can't resell it, but you also need to give credit. Okay, so the attribution to the author here, but it's free to use. And some others that you may look at might be a little bit more complicated. So when we look at the files over here, what you'll notice is that this one requires some assembly. So you'd have to go through and print all of these different pieces as you go through and take a look at it. And again, in this case, they have all different types of copters, octocopters, hexacopters, quadcopters, that you can use to print out the props in different sizes. So again, if we're thinking about just from a testing point of view, this is a nice one because it has all those different pieces, and you could actually start to do some comparisons. Now, as we turn our attention towards the curriculum and what that might look like, there are places where you can go and get curriculum. And what I want to point out is that you can program drones, and then there's a way to also fly them. So as we reference in the article, you can think about like having a sort of a controller that you might have for a video game that might allow you to fly the copter, but you can also program it. So this will bring in math lessons if you're looking for a nice STEM activity, and you can start to see, that there is some geometry that comes in, the coding piece that we look at, and as you go through, that will give you these types of lesson plans that you can work on. Now, from a coding point of view, um, there are things that you'll have to do that are specific to a drone, but then things like loops, math, variables, those are things that you can use for all different types of block-based coding. And so that can be really useful. Um, in this particular case, you would find typically an iOS or Android file that you would use. Tinker also does something similar, and again, you can see, they have it broken down very similarly, and you would pull these out, and you can build out of PVC pipe sort of an indoor course. So for a lot of the small drones, in this case, it's going to take off, it's going to move forward for 1 second, turn right by 180 degrees, and this will start to lead us towards thinking about how might I use this in my science classroom. Typically, as a physics teacher, I would use carts for my students to be measuring things, but this might add a little bit of motivation for students, especially those younger students, like how fast is this thing actually moving, how fast can it accelerate, and what information we might need in order to do this. And here's opportunities where, an example, it goes forward for 1 second, you can actually make and adjust that. So it's going through a course as we learn, and we can figure out, well, if it goes this fast, then, and how far it needs to go, start taking some actual measurements to get it to go through a specific course. So you could actually give students the course dimensions, then have them program it essentially sight unseen, and then see if they can fly through it. So as we think about different uses for drones, remember that the heavier drones, when they go outside, they'll be affected by the wind. Those light ones, they may not even fly outside. A very small one can be affected even by the air currents within a building. Okay, so think about that. But what are the effect of those winds? Measuring the speed or the acceleration of the drone, and then thinking about the camera. So using the camera to measure the speed and distance and time of another object. So that other object could be, you could fly the drone up high, have cars going underneath it, or students sort of running back and forth, or throwing or kicking a ball, any of those types of things. Um, but you can also think about like doing a scaled activity. So we do things like the cell, right? Having students act out the cell. So thinking about this area being the area outside on the playground, or in a grassy area that you might measure, and then having students interact as different parts of the cell, or doing a truly scaled version of the solar system if you wanted to give them a good sense of things. Again, using the copter to fly over top of that area, or even doing orbits, thinking about some of the activities that we do relative to eclipses. All those types of things can now be filmed from up above. So that's an interesting prospect as well. And then I would remind you that lots of students will have access to software that allow them to do video analysis. This is a particular case where students, typically we have a camera and it's sort of set, but if you get a camera up above, you can take that footage and start to take a look at it. You can also think about the ecology of the area and taking measurements, and maybe even searching or hunting for animals, things like that. And as a next step, you can take your video that you've created and use something like ThingLink, and we'll take a look at this when we talk about VR coming up soon. But in ThingLink, you can create hotspots within the video. So just imagine that you have like a little ecological area, and you take the video of it. You can then put hotspots on that are clickable, that'll provide text or additional videos or pictures of what might be in this particular area or what's in the stream, that type of thing. And so all of that gives you some sense of how you might start using drones in your science classroom. And then one of the things that as I start to use drones, I refer back to one of my favorite videos. It's from OK Go, called I Won't Let You Down, so you can search for that if you want. But what I want you to notice is that in this video, they have markings, and it's a very intricate video. I'll play a little bit. as they would go through, um, uh, I'll play the video again here. We'll leave the music off this time, but you can start to get a sense of things that you could measure. We could easily go through and measure these types of things. That drone was very still, but thinking about those markings on the ground and how they might become important, and showing this type of video to students might just serve as a little motivational tool for them and getting them thinking about how they might be able to use a drone in their footage. So once again, we hope you enjoyed the article this month and you start thinking about how you might use drones. And we'd love for you to post in the blog some of the ways that you're using